Nintendo. The House of Mario, Metroid, Zelda, Pokemon, Fire Emblem, and countless other franchises that stand among the finest in their genres. In recent years, they've been criticized for not creating new IPs, but anyone who's played Pushmo and The Last Story will tell you that that's simply not true. However, with all these new faces popping up with their own franchises, what about the names under the big N that no one remembers? Or, worse yet, the ones that people know and love, but haven't gotten the sequel that they deserved? For whatever reason, some franchises just never get a second shot to impress the gaming public, or after several installments, they fade into obscurity, never to be given another chance in the spotlight. But with Pilot Wings returning last year, and Kid Icarus making a big comeback earlier this year, there is hope that Nintendo might dig into their archives and bring back another series. Now, before we go on, there's two things that need to be clarified. One, these are games that fall under the Nintendo license. As much as I'd like to see another Killer Instinct or Conquer, it's just not going to happen on a Nintendo console anytime soon. 2. There's a ton of titles out there that deserve sequels that have been released on Nintendo, Sony, Sega, and Microsoft consoles throughout the years, but we'll be leaving that for another list. So, in honor of those titles, both loved and lost, I present to you the top 10 Nintendo series that need to come back.
Sorry to keep you waiting!
Number 10. While Balloon Fight may be nothing more than a joust ripoff, it was still a fun title back in its day. It's a pretty simple concept. Fly around and beat enemies in single-player co-op mode while racking up a high score. This would be a pretty easy game to build on. Make more enemy types, bring in more power-ups, and just keep the fun of the original intact. Perhaps something more ambitious could be tried for the multiplayer. Maybe they could try a battle mode or a versus mode similar to Mario Kart.
Sorry to keep you waiting!
Number 9. Okay, I know a lot of you are going to crap for this series for being put solo, and that's probably because I haven't played any of the games in the series. The first one was never released outside of Japan, without the use of ROMs, which I refrain from using. The second one is a tad expensive for an SNES game, not to mention a bit uncommon. And Mother 3, like the first one, has never been released outside of Japan. The Mother series is one of those that was just doomed right from the start. The localization of Mother 1, aka Earthbound 0, was finished, but was never released. The second one, Mother 2, aka Earthbound, came out before Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger began the RPG genre's entrance into the mainstream, not to mention it was a bit too expensive at the time. And the third one, Mother 3, was released in Japan a year after the Nintendo DS came out. So along with poor timing and the long development cycle that this game had, the localization of this title would take years due to the amount of dialogue in it. However, more recent comments suggest that Mother 3 may actually be getting localized years after its Japanese release, so take it with a grain of salt. There's also a fan-made Mother 4 in the works, but I'd like to see more than just another remake. I'd like to see what is so great about this series in a new installment. Even without playing this series, the joy that the Mother series has brought to its devoted fanbase is unprecedented by many, and like many others, I want to see what all the fuss is about in a new installment. If not, Mr. T will be very upset.
Mother, there is no other like mother, so treat her right.
Sorry to keep you waiting!
Number 8. This one is sort of cheating because this title was actually made by Game Freak before they had all their games licensed by Nintendo. Well, to that, the Virtual Console port is published by Game Freak themselves, and since they're an exclusive Nintendo developer, that's good enough to make it on my list. Pulseman was a Genesis, or if you prefer in Japan, Mega Drive title that had a limited release in the West on the Sega channel, and, as I said earlier, it was released for the Virtual Console over a decade later. As a 2D platformer, it was an incredibly polished experience with the defining game mechanic known as Volt Tackle. If that sounds familiar to Pokemon fans, it should, as this was the inspiration for Pikachu's signature move, Volt Tackle. Actually, there's a ton of references to Pulseman in the Pokemon series, especially in the more recent installments. Say, Game Freak, instead of teasing us with the fact that you know you created one of the best platformers of the 16-bit era, why don't you, I don't know, make a sequel with the same level of attention that the original got? They clearly know how to make a good platformer. They even made another one which may or may not make it on this list.
Sorry to keep you waiting!
Number 7. After a remake on the 3DS, there's been no news on the future for the series. Do I really need to go on as to why this series needs a sequel? There hasn't been a traditional home console successor to the excellent Starfox 64 since, well, ever. We did get Starfox Command on the DS, which was alright, but it didn't add anything significant to the series formula except for more story. A new Starfox game on any console would be great, preferably on the Wii U. It could use the tablet to plan airstrikes on a place, or as a radar in a new multiplayer dogfight mode, preferably with an online function to play against your friends across the world. For whatever happens, let's just hope that it doesn't take the Starfox team much longer to let us all do a barrel roll.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Number 6. How has this game had nothing for it except a Smash Bros. Cameo? Oh, for sales. Well, anyway, Drill Dozer was one of the most brilliant games on the Game Boy Advance, and certainly one of the most overlooked. With such a simple but well-used design of the Dozer, Drill Dozer had some of the most interesting game mechanics for any platformer. Throw in a silly but enjoyable plot that left on a cliffhanger ending, and it's not hard to see why Game Freak needs to get their game on and work on a successor to this title. Now, with Game Freak making another platformer, Harmonite, why not dust off the old Dozer for a spin while you're at it? Or at the very least, put on the radio and let Drill Dozer harmonize with this new title.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Number 5. One title, and they've been in one of Nintendo's biggest franchises, Super Smash Bros., for 2 entries. Why? Pit had only 2 games when he made it into Brawl, so why feature these 2 characters so prominently when they only have 1 title under their belt? To be fair, Ice Climbers was a fun game that was primarily about getting a high score, and eggplants. Now, from what you just heard, it doesn't sound like this is a great concept for a series to be revived off of. But I think that there's a lot of hidden potential for this series, specifically with the concept of the Ice Climbers themselves. They could try something simple like go the route of Contra 4 in that they make it very similar to the original but update it for modern standards. They could change it into a classic action title that takes place in icy stages for the most part. They could try something along the lines of New Super Mario Bros. By just updating the formula to current standards in glorious 2.5D. Or, in my own personal preference, why not make it a survival game in the harsh mountain climates with co-op? Something along the lines of The Last of Us, minus the zombies of course, and with the more solitary feeling in the Untamed Wild. As long as they make the characters recognizable, I don't see much of a problem with that. There's a ton of other options that they could take to this relatively simple arcade title and turn it into a masterpiece of gaming. Come on Nintendo, give these 2 a smashing comeback.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Number 4. Now here's a franchise that I never played. So why am I putting it on this list, let alone this high? Well, for that very same reason. The Star Tropic titles are cherished classics to Nintendo fans.
Seriously, who the hell did the developers think this game was for?
Some more than others, but still classics nonetheless. Unlike the Ice Climbers, there was more than one title, and a story to boot. What doomed the series was an untimely release of the second game in 1994, way past the NES's prime time. A new Star Tropics title would be a great idea, a callback to the old overhead action titles like Zelda, and could bring back a challenge level that the industry sorely lacks nowadays. When you wish upon a star, all your dreams come true. I wish there was a Star Tropics 3.
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Number 3. Never heard of this title? Well, that's probably because it wasn't heavily promoted when it came out in 1997, and that it did not exactly do so well in sales. One of the most underrated gems on the original Game Boy, Momina could be best described as Zelda with only one weapon, your wit. You had to move a black ball from one part of the stage to a door and destroy it. Repeat until you get to a boss, beat that boss, rinse, and repeat. The level designs were unique, the puzzles were clever, and took advantage of the Light World Dark World-esque digging mechanic at every opportunity, and the game was just a joy to play through, with constant reminders of other classic Nintendo characters like Mario. Yeah, Jimmy, you're not fooling anybody. It was designed by Nintendo EAD and the god among game designer Shigeru Miyamoto, and it's probably his least well-known work to date. And that shouldn't be so. It's a small title with some fun game mechanics that were right for expanding upon in future installments. Besides, it's a game with a mole that wears a scarf and sunglasses that fights Mario! Do I need to justify this anymore? Next number!
Sorry to keep you waiting.
Number 2. I begin with this? The F-Zero series skipped this entire console generation after the fantastic entry F-Zero GX on the GameCube and a Game Boy Advance title that never made it outside of Japan. The F-Zero titles were fast-paced, incredibly challenging, and near the top of the racing genre, testing your reflexes with every turn. They didn't feature the items of Mario Kart, the realistic driving of Forza. It was just pure, unadulterated mayhem. The only hope for a return to the next generation of consoles comes from a ride in Nintendo Land which features the Blue Falcon, and the appearance of Maximum Velocity on the many Ambassador titles for the 3DS Ambassador program. To many, this is THE Nintendo franchise that needs to make a comeback right now. But for my own personal list, it has to be something a little different, which is why I present to you number 1. Yoshi's Island is one of the greatest games ever conceived. The sheer amount of creativity within this title and the complementary gameplay surpass many games and series in their entirety. Countless spin-offs and other filler titles in the past 2 decades, and yet there has never been a true Yoshi's Island 2. It is astounding that there has been no direct continuation of this masterpiece. The closest that we have is Yoshi's Island DS, but that title was merely going through the motions rather than taking the mechanics of the first title and really running with it. It lacked the charming visuals and simplicity of the original. It didn't add anything to the formula. It used gimmicks to try and sell itself, but ultimately just ended up trying to be an expansion rather than a successor. Probably why they decided to change it from its original name to Yoshi's Island DS. Even if you do consider it a true sequel, Yoshi's Island DS came out 6 years ago. In gaming years, that's a long time. With the port of Yoshi's Island on the Nintendo 3DS Ambassador program, only a slight bit of hope remains for this to ever come true. Yoshi's Island was a big risk for Nintendo, but it paid off for them immensely. It was a well-crafted platformer with a genius egg mechanic and charming visuals that sold several millions on both the Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance. It also made Yoshi more than a means for Mario to jump higher. It made him into a prominent character in the Mario series and formed his own niche with one of the greatest platformers ever made. Yoshi's Island. If only one of these games could get another sequel, this island-dwelling masterpiece would have to be it.